And if we can all take our seats, ladies and gentlemen, we will begin. I would like to officially welcome you to NASA's Johnson Space Center and our historic Mission Control Room. I'm your Mission Control host today. My name is Neil, and I want to thank you very much for braving the chill to come out here and witness what's going on here at Mission Control here at Johnson Space Center. Whether you realize it or not, ladies and gentlemen, you just walked into one of the most famous rooms on this planet.
Whoa.
This is the one and only world famous Apollo Mission Control, ladies and gentlemen. This is where it all happened for so many years, but especially well known for the years between 1968 and 1972, when the smart young people in this room were helping to guide our astronauts to the moon and back safely for the first time during the Apollo program. Not only is this the actual room where all of that took place, but believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, these are the actual consoles that they used in those days. So have a look at the cutting edge technology of 1960. This building is a National Historic Landmark. So that means everything that you see around you here has to be authentic from the 1960s, including me.
Part of technology.
And for those of you on the second row and all the way back, if you look on the seat back in front of you, those gray metal containers are called ashtrays for all the healthy smoking that went on in the 1960s. But because we're a National Historic Landmark, everything has to be authentic, right down to those ashtrays on the back. Doesn't that seem weird? Doesn't it see them now? So strange. Well, this is the private viewing room, ladies and gentlemen. This was never a public venue. This was not open to the public in those days. This room was for the astronauts and their families, NASA administrators, VIP guests, military officers. Every American president from Lyndon Johnson to George W. Bush has been in this room. 1981, Her Majesty Queen of England came visit here. Of course, she had front row seat, and she said, "Sir, where you are in the king's chair for the day." So work on the wave, okay? Work on that wave thing, man.
Do it again.
This room served as NASA's mission control from 1965 all the way to 1992, believe it or not, almost 30 years. Now, yes, the equipment was upgraded as the technology became available, but remember what I said earlier, we're inside of a National Historic Landmark. So all of this has been restored to look just like it did on the day that we landed on the moon in 1969. Isn't that a little bit cool? Kind of see what the past looked like. Well, during that period of time, we did have 41 successful missions that take place from this room here. You look on the wall on the right side of Mission Control, you'll see wooden plaques attached to the wall. Each one of those plaques represents one of the successful missions, and the plaques are identical to the cloth patches that the astronauts wore on their flight suits. But you'll also notice that they're all different. Why is that? Because NASA allowed each astronaut crew to work with a graphic artist, and they got to design their own mission patch. And let me tell you what, those astronauts took that very, very seriously. So there's a lot of history there as well. The very bottom row, the large plaques on the bottom, those come from the Gemini program. That was the first missions that were flown here from Houston in 1965 and 66. We called the program Gemini because of the constellation Gemini the Twins, meaning two. The Gemini spacecraft had 2 astronauts in them, one more than the Mercury astronauts, and then one additional one for the Apollo when we had 3 astronauts in the spacecraft. Look at the American flag in the corner. Directly above that, you see 2 rows of smaller plaques. The top row of those 2, those are the plaques for the Apollo program. All 10 Apollo mission plaques are on that wall, including the 6 times that NASA landed successfully on the moon. So we did land on the moon 6 times, and 12 American astronauts walked on the surface of the moon. And the last 3 missions to the moon, Apollo 15, 16, and 17, those astronauts not only walked, but they rode around on the moon. They had an electric car up there with 4-wheel drive. It's the Lunar Rover. It's over in the Starship Gallery back at Space Center Houston. Be sure you see it. And so if you're looking for a very low mileage used car, there are 3 on the moon. You're welcome to go get one if you so desire. I can tell you exactly where they are. On the other side of the post, you'll start seeing icons for Space Shuttle. And that's because the first 21 of the 135 Space Shuttle flights, first 21 were from this room here, but with that upgraded equipment I mentioned to you. Okay? Then in 1992, a big decision had to be made. NASA did not have enough money to continue to upgrade this room as it had done for the previous 30 years. So what they did was, okay, thanks for the memories, we're shutting down this floor and we're moving our mission control operations room. And where they moved it is 1 floor directly below us where we are right now. You walked right past them when you came up the stairs. Okay? Now, we're not able to go and visit an active mission control room, but I've done the very next best thing. If you look at these 2 television pictures to your left and to your right, these are 2 different camera angles of the very same room. And this room, as you see on television, is 1 floor below historic mission control. Okay? And you're looking at the mission control for the International Space Station. Don't forget about the International Space Station, ladies and gentlemen. Would it surprise you if I told you it's been in orbit for 15 years? It has. And we have funding until 2024, so we know we'll be up there at least another decade. And my guess is, just personally speaking, that it'll last another 5 years beyond that, and that means we will have gotten 30 years of use out of the International Space Station. Ironically enough, that's the same amount of time we had for our space shuttle fleet, 30 years, from 1981 to 2011, the fleet was flying. So, we never have an empty room. We always have people in mission control watching out for the spacecraft and the various precious cargo on board, which is, of course, the astronauts. And we do have a full house right now, which is 6. There are 2 Americans, there are 3 Russians, and 1 Italian astronaut from the European Space Agency. They travel in groups of 3s, and when they arrive on the space station, their mission lasts approximately 5.5 to 6 months, and then we bring them back home. Does anyone have questions for me about this room or NASA in general? While we're here, we're getting ready to go to our next stop in just a moment, but I wanted to see if you had some questions. You're just happy to be warm?
Yeah. Is that authentic flag from the moon?
Yes, the flag in the corner over here, that flag has gone to the moon not once but twice, actually.
Cool.
It went as a backup flag on the Apollo 11, which is our very first mission, and then it went back on Apollo 17, which was our 6th and final Apollo mission to the moon. On Apollo 11, they just left it on the spacecraft. On Apollo 17, they actually took it out and put it in the lunar surface, and the last American astronaut on the moon, Eugene Cernan, gave it a snappy salute. And he packed it all back up, and they brought it back here to the Earth, and then they presented it to the astronauts presented it to the engineers here at Mission Control. So you're looking at a flag that has flown over 1 million miles in space.
Cool.
And the flags that are still on the moon, you can see pictures of them directly behind you. Your question, sir?
Yeah, how do the American astronauts currently get back and forth from the space station?
Temporarily, we have a contract with our Russian partners, Roscosmos, that's their NASA, and we purchase seats from them on their Soyuz spacecraft, and we ride on top of their Proton rocket, which has recently celebrated its 500th launch. It's an amazing vehicle. And the Soyuz spacecraft is their Apollo spacecraft. It holds 3 as well. And those launches and the landings take place in Kazakhstan at a place called the Baikonur Cosmodrome, which is the same as our NASA. Now, hopefully within 2 years, Boeing and a new company called SpaceX, which is also a private company, they've been given contracts to develop new generation vehicles to take American astronauts from American soil up to the space station and back, and we will not have a reliance upon another country. But we're about 2 years away from that right now. You're welcome.
Is there any plans to go back to the moon?
There are other countries that are talking about this. One specifically is China, which is very interesting. They have a very modest space program in comparison to the United States. What we're looking at is, NASA is focusing on deep space exploration. We're aiming to get to Mars eventually, okay? One of those steps along the way does involve the moon. Now, whether we actually land, we're not certain, but we know that we are going to be doing a huge elliptical orbit around the moon with a crewed capsule. The Orion spacecraft looks almost exactly like the Apollo. It's 3 feet in diameter, a little bit bigger. It's 16 feet in diameter instead of 13 feet. And the Orion will hold 4 astronauts, and the Apollo held 3. So that's in the plans, but where that happens, we just had our first test flight in December that was virtually flawless. I was in Florida for the launch, and it was one of the most thrilling things that I've ever seen before. There were no humans aboard, we were just testing the spacecraft. And the first human-rated flight is supposed to occur sometime around 2020, maybe 2021, depending upon if the federal government, let me say this nicely, to make sure the federal government funds the program as they have promised that they will. Because that's the 2 things that make rockets go up, technology and funding. We only control half of that equation. Is that nice enough?
Yes.
No?
Well said.
Thank you.
What's the role of individual stations, these offices that you see?
Each one of these is the biggest way, this is a gross oversimplification of mission control, but it's the best one I've come up with. Think of mission control as being like the dashboard on your car. What's on the dashboard of your car? All kinds of gauges and sensors and lights that tell you how the systems on your car are working. And that's what each one of these desks was responsible for one major system on the spacecraft, all right? Guidance, navigation and control, retro rockets, booster fire, electric power, and we have operations and procedures manager over here to making sure things are going right. And they all reported to the boss, who is the flight director, second row of consoles right in the middle. That was the boss. There's a 24-hour rotation of flight directors. So they would all be staring at these monitors, and the reason that we needed so many people in those days is because, get ready, the room you're looking at, remember this is what we used in the 60s, there is not one personal computer in that room. Why? They hadn't been invented yet. The microchip had not been invented yet. So these television screens are just the monitors. The computers we did have were called mainframe computers. And if you've never seen a mainframe, you just need to go Google it, because you probably will never find one again. Because it's as big as this room. I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah.
This was considered small in the 60s. You take out all these chairs, take out us, this was a mainframe computer. Ground floor, all of these consoles are hand-wired to this computer. Total memory capacity, 2 megabytes. Yes, 2 megabytes. That's about a digital picture. And we had 5 of those on the ground floor. That was the maximum power, man. This was mission control, state of the art. We went to the moon, ladies and gentlemen, on about 10 megabytes of memory. I'm not joking. It's amazing.